I thought I was just helping my family, until I realized they had built their lives around me. And the first time I stepped back, everything started falling apart. The first time I earned real money, I didn't feel proud. I felt like I had just stepped into something I couldn't step out of. I didn't grow up thinking anything was wrong. In my house, things just worked a certain way, and no one ever questioned it. My dad, Frank, had this quiet belief that hung over everything we did. He never turned it into some big speech, but you could hear it in the way he talked. Nothing you earn is just yours. It belongs to the family too. When I was a kid, that idea felt normal. Helping out meant doing chores, watching my younger sister Emily, or giving up something small so someone else could have it. It didn't feel like pressure. It just felt like being part of something. I remember one night at the kitchen table, my dad going over bills like he always did. He told me that in this family, you carry your weight. And when you can carry more, you do. He said it like it was common sense, like gravity or weather, just something that exists whether you like it or not. I nodded. I always nodded back then. Things started shifting when I got my first part-time job. I was still in high school, just trying to save a little money for myself. But when I brought home that first paycheck, my dad didn't ask what I planned to do with it. He just said it was good, because now I could help out more. Not you earn this. Not be smart with it. Just help out more. So I did. I started covering small things. Gas, groceries, stuff like that. My mom would thank me quietly, almost like she felt bad about it. My dad never made a big deal, just that same small nod, like I was doing what I was supposed to do all along. And honestly, I didn't mind. It felt good to be useful. By the time I graduated college and got my first full-time job, that mindset was already locked in. I picked something stable, worked hard, kept my life simple. When that first real paycheck hit my account, I remember staring at it for a long time. It felt like a turning point. Like maybe now, I could finally build something of my own. That feeling lasted exactly a week. I went home for dinner that weekend. Same kitchen, same table. My dad asked how work was going, and I told him it was good, better than I expected. He nodded, took a sip of his coffee, and said, almost casually, that things should be easier around the house now. That was it. No question, no discussion, just an expectation. And I told myself it made sense. They'd supported me for years. Of course I should give back. So when my mom mentioned a higher electric bill, I didn't hesitate. I said I'd take care of it. She smiled. My dad nodded. And just like that, without any argument or announcement, something shifted. My money didn't feel like mine anymore. And the part that gets me now? I didn't question it. Not once. But that dinner, that quiet, ordinary night, was where it all started. Because what I thought was helping was already turning into something I wouldn't be able to stop. At first, it never felt like pressure. It felt like being needed. After that dinner, helping out just became part of my routine. I didn't wait to be asked. If something came up, a bill, a repair, a last-minute expense, I stepped in before anyone had to say it out loud. My mom would still thank me, but even that started to fade. Not in a cold way, just quieter, less frequent, like it was becoming normal. My dad didn't change much at all. Same nod, same calm tone, but the way he talked about money shifted. It wasn't if you can help anymore. It was more like, we'll figure it out. And somehow, I was always part of that we. I didn't think twice about it. If anything, I leaned into it. I picked up extra hours, pushed for raises, stayed late at work. I told myself I was building something. For me, yeah, but also for them. That's what family does, right? The first real shift came about a year into my job. My sister Emily needed help with tuition. Nothing crazy, just a gap she couldn't cover. My parents brought it up one night, casually, like they were just thinking out loud. I remember my dad saying something like, "It's not a huge amount. We'll handle it." But then he looked at me. Not directly, just enough. And I said I'd take care of it. No discussion, no hesitation. It felt like the obvious thing to do. After that, it stopped being occasional. There was always something. Car trouble, medical bills, a broken appliance, a late payment that needed covering, just this once. Every time, it came with the same tone. Reasonable, temporary, understandable. And I believed it. I started adjusting my own life without even realizing it. I held off on moving out of my small apartment. Put off trips I wanted to take. Told myself I'd think about buying a place later. There was always something more important. What I didn't notice, at least not right away, was how the conversation started changing. Money wasn't something I offered anymore. It was something that got discussed around me. Plans would come up, and my name would just be part of the solution. Like it was already decided. No one said it outright. No one demanded anything. But there was this quiet assumption underneath everything. That I would handle it. That I always would. And the truth is, I kept proving them right. Because every time there was a pause, every time there was even a hint of hesitation in the room, I filled it. I told myself I was doing the right thing. But somewhere in the back of my mind, something small started to bother me. Not enough to stop, just enough to notice. Because the more I gave, the less it felt like help. And the more it started to feel like something expected. And I still didn't realize yet. This wasn't going to slow down on its own. I can't point to one exact moment where everything changed. It was more like a slow realization that crept in over time, the kind you try to ignore because admitting it would mean something deeper was wrong. At some point, the word temporary stopped meaning anything. Every time I helped, it came with that same framing. Just this once. Just until things settle. Just a rough patch. And I believed it, every single time. But the rough patches never really ended. They just rotated. If it wasn't my sister needing help, it was my dad dealing with something unexpected. If it wasn't that, it was my mom mentioning a bill that came in higher than expected. There was always a reason, always something that made sense in the moment. And I kept stepping in. What started to feel different wasn't the helping, it was the way it was received. There was a time when my mom would sit with me, thank me properly, ask if I was sure. That faded. Now it was more like a quick, we'll figure it out, followed by a look in my direction. And that was enough. No one had to ask anymore. Even my dad stopped framing things carefully. He'd talk about expenses like I was already part of the plan. Not in a harsh way, just calm, matter of fact. Like it was obvious. Like it had always been this way. I remember one night in particular. We were sitting at the table again, going over something with the house. Repairs, I think. The numbers were higher than expected. My dad laid everything out, explaining the situation. Then he said, we'll need to take care of it soon. Not can you help. Not even a pause. Just that. And I realized something in that moment. He wasn't including me. He was counting on me. There's a difference. It's small, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. I still agreed. Of course I did. I always did. But that night stuck with me longer than the others. Because for the first time, I didn't feel like I was helping. I felt like I was filling a role. Like if I didn't step in, something would break. Not just financially, but in the way the whole family functioned. And that thought bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Still, I pushed it down. Told myself I was overthinking it. That this was just what being responsible looked like. But then something else started to shift. I began noticing what wasn't there. No one asked about my plans anymore. No one asked what I wanted to do with my money. Big decisions came up, repairs, expenses, even things involving extended family. And I'd hear about them after they were already being discussed. Like I was less of a person in the conversation, and more of a solution waiting to be used. And the worst part? No one thought anything was wrong with that. Not even me. At least, not yet. But that quiet feeling in the back of my mind. It wasn't going away anymore. It was getting louder. And I was getting closer to a realization I wasn't ready for. That this wasn't going to fix itself. And if I didn't change something, nothing ever would. The thing no one tells you about always being the one who helps is how quietly your own life starts to disappear. It doesn't happen all at once. It's small decisions, small delays, things you tell yourself you'll get back to later. I started noticing it when my coworkers would talk about plans, trips, moving to better places, buying their first homes. Normal stuff. The kind of things I thought I'd be doing by then too. Instead, I was always calculating. If I take this trip, that's money I might need later. If I move, I won't have as much flexibility. If something comes up at home, I need to be ready. Everything in my life had this invisible filter over it. And that filter wasn't about me. It was about what might be needed next. I told myself it was temporary. That once things settled, I'd catch up. That I was just being responsible now so I could relax later. But later never showed up. There was always something else. I remember getting close to putting a down payment on a small place. Nothing huge, just something of my own. I'd been saving for a while, quietly, not really telling anyone. For the first time in a long time, I felt excited about something that was just mine. Then my dad called. He didn't sound stressed. That was the thing. He sounded calm, almost casual. He mentioned an issue with the house, something that needed fixing sooner rather than later. It wasn't an emergency, but it wasn't something they could ignore either. He walked me through the numbers like he always did. Clear, logical, reasonable. And then he said, "We'll need to figure it out." That same word again. We. I didn't tell him about the down payment. I didn't even mention it. I just said I'd handle it. And just like that, that plan, something I had been building quietly for months, was gone. No argument. No hesitation. Just gone. I told myself it was the right choice. That there would be other chances. But that night, sitting in my apartment, I felt something I hadn't felt before. Not anger. Not even regret, exactly. Just this heavy, quiet realization that my life was being shaped by something I wasn't really choosing anymore. And the worst part? No one had asked me to give it up. Not directly. That's what made it harder to question. Because technically, I was still deciding. But it didn't feel like a real decision. It felt like there was only one option that wouldn't cause problems. So I kept choosing it. Over and over again. That was when I started noticing something else. Whenever I did help, things moved on quickly. No real acknowledgement. No pause. Just relief, and then the next thing. It was like solving one problem just made space for another. And I started to wonder, quietly, in a way I didn't say out loud, what would happen if I didn't step in one time? Not to make a point. Not to cause a scene. Just to see what would happen. That thought stuck with me longer than it should have. Because for the first time, I wasn't thinking about how to help. I was thinking about what would happen if I didn't. And something about that felt like the beginning of a problem I couldn't ignore anymore. The first time I hesitated, it wasn't dramatic. There was no argument. No tension in the room. No big moment where everything snapped. It was just a pause. And that pause felt louder than anything I had ever said. It happened on a regular weeknight. I had just gotten home, still in my work clothes, halfway through heating something up when my phone rang. It was my mom. Her voice was calm, like always. She mentioned something about my uncle this time. He'd run into some trouble, short on money, needed help to get through the next couple of weeks. She explained it the same way everything was always explained. Reasonable. Temporary. Family. Then she said, "We were thinking maybe you could help out, just until he gets back on his feet." Not demanding. Not forceful. Just expected. Normally, I would have said yes before she even finished the sentence. But this time, something slowed me down. Maybe it was everything building up. The plans I had already pushed aside. The things I kept delaying. That quiet feeling that had been sitting in the back of my mind, getting harder to ignore. I didn't say yes. Not right away. I said I'd think about it. There was a small pause on the other end of the line. Not long, but enough to notice. My mom didn't argue. She just said, "Okay," but her tone shifted slightly. Not upset, just surprised. Like that wasn't the answer she expected to hear. We hung up, and I stood there in my kitchen, staring at nothing. That simple sentence, "I'll think about it," felt heavier than it should have. It wasn't even a no, but it felt like I had crossed some kind of invisible line. The next day, my dad called. He didn't mention my hesitation directly. He didn't need to. He just walked through the situation again. Same calm voice. Same logic. He talked about how things had been tight for my uncle, how family steps in when it matters, how we've always handled things this way. And then he said it. "You're obligated to help. You earn more." Not harsh. Not angry. Just certain. Like it wasn't even a discussion. That phrase hit differently this time. Because I realized something I hadn't fully admitted before. It wasn't about helping anymore. It was about what I owed. At least, in their eyes. I still said yes in the end. Of course I did. I sent the money, told myself it wasn't worth making a big deal over, that it was easier this way. But something had changed. Because for the first time, helping didn't feel natural. It felt expected, required. And that small hesitation I had, the one I brushed off, the one I gave in after, it didn't disappear. It stayed with me. Because now I knew something I couldn't unknow. If I stopped saying yes, it wouldn't just be about money. It would be about breaking something much bigger. And I had no idea what that would actually look like. But I was getting closer to finding out. After that call with my dad, something didn't sit right anymore. I still helped. Nothing changed on the surface. Money went where it needed to go, problems got handled, and life kept moving like it always had. But inside, it felt different. That phrase, "you're obligated to help," kept replaying in my head. Not because it was new, but because it suddenly felt true in a way I hadn't noticed before. I started paying closer attention after that. Not in some big, confrontational way. Just quietly. Watching how things worked. Listening more carefully to the way people talked. And once I noticed it, I couldn't unsee it. Every situation followed the same pattern. There was always a problem, always a reason, always a calm explanation of why it made sense for me to step in. But no one ever asked what it cost me. Not just the money, everything else. I started thinking about all the things I had pushed aside. The apartment I didn't buy, the trips I never took, the plans I kept delaying. None of those ever came up in conversations. It was like they didn't exist. Because in the version of things my family saw, I didn't have sacrifices. I had capacity. That's how my dad framed it once, without even realizing what he was saying. He mentioned how I was in a good position. Stable job. No kids. No major responsibilities. He said it like it was a fact. Like my life was lighter by default. And that meant I could carry more. I remember sitting there, listening, and realizing something that hit harder than anything before. They didn't see what I was giving up. Because to them, I wasn't giving anything up. I was just doing what I was supposed to do. That realization stuck with me for days. And then something happened that made it impossible to ignore. I found out my sister had taken a trip. Nothing huge. Just a short getaway with friends. But it wasn't something she struggled to afford. She made it work. And I remember thinking, when was the last time I did something like that? Not planned around someone else. Not delayed because something might come up. Just for me. I couldn't remember. That's when it really clicked. The support only went one way. No one was asking how they could help me. No one was adjusting their plans for my sake. Because they didn't have to. That role was mine. And I had accepted it for so long that it had stopped looking like a role at all. It just looked like reality. But now I could see it clearly. And once you see something like that, you can't go back to not seeing it. That was the moment I understood something I had been avoiding. This wasn't going to balance itself out. No one was going to suddenly realize it wasn't fair. Because for them, it already was. Which meant if anything was going to change, it wasn't going to come from them. It was going to have to come from me. And for the first time, that idea didn't just feel uncomfortable. It felt necessary. Even if I had no idea what it would cost. I didn't make the decision all at once. There was no big moment. No argument. No final straw that pushed me over the edge. It was quieter than that. It started with small thoughts I didn't push away anymore. What if I just stopped? Not completely. Not in some dramatic, cut everyone off way. Just stopped being the automatic answer. Stopped stepping in before anyone even asked. Stopped assuming it was my responsibility to fix everything. At first, even thinking that felt wrong. Like I was considering something selfish. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized how strange that feeling was. Because I wasn't talking about hurting anyone. I was just thinking about not carrying everything. And that shouldn't feel like a problem. But it did. For a few weeks, I didn't change anything on the outside. I still helped when things came up. Still said yes. Still played the same role. But internally, something had shifted. I stopped justifying it. Stopped telling myself it was temporary. Stopped pretending it would eventually balance out. I saw it for what it was. A system that worked because I kept it working. And that thought led to something else. If I was the one holding it together, what would happen if I stepped back? That question followed me everywhere. At work. At home. Even in quiet moments when nothing was happening. It wasn't loud. Just constant. And then one night, sitting alone in my apartment, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I looked at my finances. Not just what I had, but what I had spent. I went back months. Then further. Every transfer. Every temporary fix. Every situation I stepped into without thinking. When I added it all up, I just sat there for a while. It wasn't just a number. It was time. Opportunities. Plans I had quietly given up. And the thing that hit me the hardest wasn't even the amount. It was how normal it all looked. Like it was just part of my life. That was the moment the decision finally settled in. Not emotionally. Not dramatically. Just clearly. I was going to stop. No announcement. No explanation ahead of time. I wasn't going to argue or try to convince anyone. I just wasn't going to keep doing it. If something came up, I wouldn't jump in. If someone asked, I wouldn't automatically say yes. That was it. Simple. But it didn't feel simple. Because I knew this wasn't just about money. This was about breaking something that had been in place for years. Something everyone around me believed was normal. And I had a feeling they weren't going to take that change quietly. Still, I didn't second guess it. For the first time in a long time, the decision felt like it was actually mine. And that alone was enough. What I didn't know yet was how quickly everything would start to shift once I followed through. The first real test came sooner than I expected. It was my dad who called. Same timing as always. Early evening, like he knew I'd be done with work, but not fully settled yet. I could almost predict the structure before he even started talking. He asked how things were going. I said everything was fine. Then he got into it. There was an issue with the house again. Something about the plumbing this time. Not an emergency, but it needed to be handled soon. He explained the situation clearly, like he always did. Costs, timing, why it couldn't wait too long. I listened, didn't interrupt, didn't fill the silence. And when he finished, there was that familiar pause. The one where I would normally step in. Only this time, I didn't. I just said, I can't help with that. It came out calm. No tension. No attitude. Just flat. There was a silence on the other end of the line. Longer than usual. Not confused. Not even surprised exactly. More like something had gone slightly off script. My dad didn't react right away. When he finally spoke, his tone hadn't changed, but there was something tighter underneath it. He asked why. Simple question. And for a second, I realized I didn't have an answer ready. Not one he would accept, anyway. So I just said I had other priorities right now. Another pause. Then he said something that made everything very clear. He reminded me that the family had always been there for me. That we all do our part. That when one person is in a position to help, they should. And then, quieter this time. You earn more. This is part of your responsibility. There it was again. Not a request. A correction. Like I had stepped out of line. But this time, I didn't adjust. I didn't explain further. Didn't argue. I just repeated it. I can't help with this. That was the moment everything shifted. Not loudly, but permanently. The call ended shortly after that. No resolution. No agreement. Just a kind of quiet tension that hadn't been there before. And for the rest of that night, I kept expecting to feel guilty. To second-guess it. To convince myself I should call back and fix it. But none of that really happened. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar. Space. Not relief, exactly. Just space. Like something that had been constantly pressing in on me had finally eased, even if just a little. That feeling didn't last long. Because the next day, my mom called. And then my sister. Not angry. Not at first. Just trying to understand. Trying to figure out what was going on. But underneath it, I could already hear it. That same expectation. Still there. Still intact. And I realized something as those calls came in, one after another. They weren't reacting to a single no. They were reacting to the possibility that I might stop being who I had always been for them. And that was something they weren't ready to accept. Not even close. And I had a feeling this was only the beginning. At first, they kept it calm. That's what surprised me the most. No one came at me angry right away. It was more like they were trying to fix a misunderstanding. Like I had said something wrong, and they just needed to walk me back into place. My mom called again the next day. Her voice was softer than usual, careful. She asked if everything was okay, like maybe something else was going on. Stress. Work. Something that explained why I suddenly couldn't help. I told her everything was fine, and that answer didn't seem to help. She shifted after that. Started reminding me of things. Not aggressively, just listing them. Times they supported me. Things they had done. Sacrifices I probably hadn't even noticed growing up. It wasn't said outright, but the message was clear. You didn't get here alone. I listened. Let her finish. Then I said the same thing. I just can't help this time. There was a pause. Longer than before. And when she spoke again, the softness was gone. Not replaced with anger, just something colder. Like she didn't recognize me the same way anymore. My sister tried a different approach. She didn't bring up the house. Didn't mention the money directly. She just called to check in. But it didn't take long for the conversation to turn. She asked if everything was okay between me and Dad. Said he seemed off. Said everyone was a little confused. Then she said something that stuck with me. She told me I was acting different. Like that, by itself, explained the problem. Not the situation. Not the years leading up to it. Just me. Different. And that word carried more weight than anything else. Because in her voice, it didn't sound like growth. It sounded like failure. Like I had stepped outside of something I wasn't supposed to leave. By the third day, the tone changed completely. The calls weren't about understanding anymore. They were about correction. My dad called again. This time, there was no small talk. He went straight into it. He said this wasn't how things worked. That the family depended on each other. That everyone had roles, whether we liked it or not. And then he said something that made everything finally click. He said, "We've always been able to rely on you. Not, we appreciate you. Not, you've helped us. Rely. Like I was part of the structure. Like removing me wasn't just inconvenient. It was a problem. And that's when I understood what had been sitting underneath all of this. I wasn't just helping them. They had built around me, around what I provided, around what I would always say yes to. And now that I wasn't doing that anymore, it wasn't just about money. It was about everything that depended on it. The call slowed down after that, not because things were resolved, but because something had shifted. The tone wasn't confused anymore. It wasn't even frustrated. It was distant, like they were pulling back, trying to figure out what I was now, if I wasn't the person they had always counted on. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. The way they viewed me, not as someone who helped, not as someone who chose to be there, but as someone who was supposed to be. And the moment I stepped out of that, everything about how they treated me started to change. And I knew then, the real reaction hadn't even started yet. It came in pieces. At first, it was distance. Fewer calls, shorter conversations. That quiet shift where you realize you're still included, but only technically. Then came the conversations about me. Not to me. About me. I heard it through my aunt. Through my sister, indirectly. Through the way my mom's voice changed when she thought I wouldn't notice. I had changed. I was selfish now. Success had gotten to me. That part almost got to me. For a moment, I actually sat there and wondered if they were right. If maybe I had crossed some line without realizing it. If choosing myself, even a little, really did make me the kind of person they were describing. But then something happened that cleared everything up. My dad called. First time in a while. No tension. No build-up. Just straight to the point, like always. He told me they had handled the situation with the house. Took longer than expected. Cost more. Wasn't easy. But they figured it out. Then he said, almost casually, "We managed." That was it. And for a second, I didn't know how to respond. Because for years, I had believed something without ever saying it out loud. That if I didn't step in, things wouldn't work. That I was necessary. That everything depended on me being there to fix it. But it didn't. They adjusted. They struggled a little, sure, but they figured it out. Just like anyone does when they don't have another option. And in that moment, everything finally made sense. It was never that they couldn't manage without me. It was that they didn't have to. Because I made sure of it. I made it easier. For them. And harder for myself. We ended the call normally. No argument. No resolution. Just neutral. But after I hung up, I sat there thinking about everything I had spent years believing. And I realized something simple. I wasn't valued because I helped. I was valued because I never stopped. Because I never questioned it. Because I made their lives easier without asking what it cost me. And the moment that stopped, so did the version of me they were comfortable with. That was the truth. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just clear. I still talk to them. We're still family. But now, there's space. And for the first time in my life, that space actually belongs to me. Because I finally understood something I should have learned a long time ago. Helping someone should be a choice. Not the role you disappear into.